Hello, my beautiful Virgo. I'm so happy you're here today. I hope you're finding a quiet little moment just for yourself, because this reading feels deeply emotional. It feels like a story that has been unfolding behind the scenes for much longer than you may realize. If this message finds you at the right time, I truly believe there may be something here that resonates with your heart. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy these readings, leave a like if this message speaks to you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always love hearing your experiences because your story may help someone else who quietly needs to hear it today. Okay, let's take a slow breath together and see what the cards want to reveal. The first card that immediately catches my attention is the Five of Cups. This feels heavy. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just quietly heavy. It feels like someone has been carrying around a weight they never fully admitted was there. On the outside, they may have continued living their life, smiling when they needed to, handling responsibilities, pretending everything was under control. But underneath all of that, something has never really left their heart. The interesting thing is that this feeling doesn't seem sudden. It feels like it has been growing little by little. Every memory, every quiet evening, every familiar song, every place that somehow reminds them of you has slowly become impossible to ignore. They're beginning to realize that what they tried to leave behind never actually disappeared. It simply waited until they were finally ready to look at it. Judgment appears next, and oh my God, this changes the atmosphere completely. It feels like they're waking up from a very long sleep. Not because someone forced them to, but because life itself has been placing little mirrors in front of them. Situations, conversations, disappointments, all of them seem to lead back to one uncomfortable realization. They keep asking themselves why they made the choices they made, why fear seemed safer than honesty, why distance felt easier than vulnerability. Virgo, it almost feels like they're replaying entire chapters of your connection inside their mind. They remember moments they once overlooked. They remember things you said that didn't seem important back then, but suddenly carry so much meaning today. It's almost as if they're hearing your voice differently now. They're understanding your silence differently now. Yeah, I also feel they're becoming painfully aware that they spent far too much energy protecting themselves instead of protecting what truly mattered. The Page of Swords comes into the reading, and immediately I get this feeling that curiosity has quietly turned into longing. They may find themselves checking your social media without even realizing how often they're doing it, looking at old pictures, reading conversations they never deleted, wondering how you're doing, wondering if you've changed, wondering if someone else has taken the place they once believed would always belong to them. They're searching for tiny clues, not because they want to control you, but because they're hoping to find some small sign that the connection hasn't completely disappeared. Even if they never admit it out loud, part of them is still listening for your energy. Then we have the Hermit. This card feels incredibly personal. It doesn't feel like isolation because they want to be alone. It feels more like life has placed them in a season where they can't keep distracting themselves anymore. The noise has become quieter. The excuses don't work like they used to. They're finally sitting with themselves, and that's not always comfortable. Because once everything becomes quiet, the truth has a way of speaking. They're beginning to notice that every decision they made out of fear slowly pushed them further away from the one person who made them feel understood. Instead of choosing honesty, they chose distance. Instead of asking difficult questions, they avoided them. Instead of risking disappointment, they convinced themselves it was safer not to try at all. That's the part they seem to regret the most. It doesn't necessarily feel like they're blaming themselves for everything that happened. It feels more balanced than that. They're simply recognizing their own role in the story. They're finally allowing themselves to admit that fear made far too many decisions for them. Virgo, your energy throughout this reading feels surprisingly calm, almost peaceful. It feels like while they've been slowly waking up, you've been learning how to protect your own heart. You've been finding your own balance, whether you realize it or not. That quiet strength seems to be one of the reasons they can't stop thinking about you. Because every time they revisit the past, they don't just remember your kindness, they remember your patience. They remember the moments you stayed when they expected you to leave. They remember the conversations they avoided. They remember the opportunities they quietly let slip through their hands. And little by little, they're beginning to understand that what they lost wasn't ordinary. They're not simply remembering a relationship, they're remembering how they felt when they were with you. Sometimes, that's the realization that changes everything. Something about this energy keeps drawing my attention back to the Seven of Swords. It doesn't feel like someone who wanted to hurt you on purpose. It feels more like someone who spent so much of their life believing they had to hide parts of themselves just to survive. They became incredibly skilled at pretending everything was fine, pretending they had answers when they didn't, pretending they weren't affected by things that actually cut much deeper than anyone ever realized. Virgo, I almost feel like whenever emotions became too real, this person automatically switched into survival mode. They would change the subject, distract themselves with work, throw themselves into responsibilities, or convince themselves that staying emotionally distant somehow made them stronger. They kept telling themselves that if nobody could see what was happening inside, then nobody could disappoint them. Yeah, that may have worked for a while, but it also kept them from showing you who they truly were. The more I sit with this energy, the more it feels like they confuse control with safety. They believed that if they could manage every situation, anticipate every outcome, and never appear vulnerable, life would somehow become easier. The strange thing is, love doesn't really follow those rules. Love has a way of asking people to loosen their grip, and that was something they never quite knew how to do. The moon quietly slips into the reading, and the atmosphere becomes softer but much more complicated. There are emotions underneath the surface that even they struggle to understand. Some days they tell themselves they're over everything. Other days, one tiny reminder of you completely changes their mood. It's confusing for them because they don't always recognize the person they're becoming. They're beginning to question beliefs they've carried for years. Maybe they learned that expressing emotions was weakness. Maybe they believed love always comes with disappointment. Maybe they grew up feeling they had to earn affection instead of simply receiving it. Whatever the reason may be, those old stories are beginning to crack. Oh my God! I almost hear them asking themselves questions they've avoided for years. What if I pushed away the one person who actually accepted me? What if I spent so much time trying to protect myself that I never protected the connection? What if I was never really afraid of Virgo? What if I was afraid of being fully seen? Those questions don't leave them alone anymore. Your silence has become much louder than words ever were. It isn't because you've tried to punish them. That's not what this feels like. It's because your energy no longer chases answers, and that absence has forced them to sit alone with thoughts they kept postponing. They can't distract themselves the way they used to because there isn't anything left to argue against. Four of Swords appears, and everything slows down. Life almost seems to press a pause button around them. Conversations become quieter, distractions lose their excitement. Even the people they once relied on for validation don't seem to have the same influence anymore. Instead of reaching outward, they're beginning to look inward. That process isn't glamorous. It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes healing looks like sitting in complete silence while memories appear one after another without invitation. Sometimes it looks like realizing you were exhausted from carrying a version of yourself that was never authentic to begin with. Virgo, I don't feel they're only reflecting on what happened between the two of you. They're reflecting on the person they became long before you entered their life. They're noticing patterns that existed in friendships, family relationships, even the way they treated themselves. It's almost like your connection became the mirror that finally showed them something they couldn't ignore anymore. Nine of Swords enters, and this card feels incredibly restless. Sleep doesn't come easily. Their mind keeps replaying conversations they wish had gone differently. There are words they never spoke, apologies they rehearsed but never delivered, moments they keep rewriting inside their imagination, wondering whether one honest sentence could have changed everything. One thing that stands out is how often they compare who they pretended to be with who they wanted you to know. Those two versions no longer fit together. The mask has become exhausting. Keeping everything inside has become exhausting. Acting unaffected has become exhausting. The fear that once convinced them to stay quiet is slowly becoming heavier than the possibility of telling the truth. Yeah, that's a very different place from where they used to be. I also feel this quiet awareness growing inside them that they never truly lost your trust in one single moment. It happened little by little. Every avoided conversation, every unanswered emotion, every time they chose comfort instead of honesty. Looking back, they're beginning to recognize how those small decisions slowly created distance neither of you originally wanted. Virgo, your presence still feels remarkably grounded throughout all of this. You may not even realize how much strength you've developed simply by choosing your own peace. While they're learning what fear has cost them, you've been learning what self-respect feels like. Those two journeys seem to be unfolding separately for the moment, yet they continue to echo one another in ways neither of you fully understands. Six of Cups is resting right here in front of me, and the energy immediately softens. It feels like something inside this person has stopped fighting the memories. Instead of trying to convince themselves that the past no longer matters, they're allowing themselves to revisit it with honest eyes. They aren't only remembering what happened between the two of you, they're remembering who they were whenever you were around. Virgo, there's something incredibly comforting about the way they think of you. Your presence seems to live inside the small moments they never expected to miss. A familiar laugh, the way you listened without interrupting, the patience you showed when they struggled to explain themselves. Even the quiet moments seem to carry more meaning than they realized back then. Yeah, it's almost surprising to them. They once believed love had to be exciting all the time, unpredictable, maybe even complicated. But looking back, they're beginning to understand that what made your connection beautiful wasn't the chaos. It was the peace. It was the feeling that they didn't have to perform in order to be accepted. That realization seems to be changing something very deep inside them. They've started asking themselves a different kind of question. Instead of wondering whether someone else could love them, they're wondering whether they ever truly allowed themselves to receive the love that was already standing in front of them. Strength quietly comes into the reading, and I can't help but smile a little. This doesn't feel like the kind of strength they used to admire. It isn't about looking fearless or pretending nothing hurts. It feels like they're discovering that real courage may actually look much softer than they imagined. For perhaps the first time, they're considering what it would mean to lower their defenses, instead of constantly reinforcing them. That's not an easy lesson for someone who's spent years believing vulnerability would only lead to disappointment. They're beginning to see you differently too, not because you've changed, but because their perspective has. There were moments when they misunderstood your patience as something that would always be there no matter what they did. They mistook your kindness for something permanent, almost guaranteed. Looking back, they recognized that every conversation you offered, every opportunity to understand one another, every gentle attempt to reach them was actually a gift. You never forced them to become someone else. You simply created a space where they could have been themselves. That's something they're only fully appreciating now. King of Cups appears, and oh my God, this card carries such mature energy here. It feels like they're no longer chasing the idea of love that looks impressive from the outside. They're becoming much more interested in the kind of relationship that feels emotionally safe. Success doesn't seem to matter as much as it once did. Neither does proving themselves to everyone around them. Something inside them has quietly shifted toward wanting consistency instead of validation. They're imagining conversations where honesty replaces silence. They're imagining disagreements that end with understanding instead of distance. They're imagining coming home after a difficult day and finally feeling like they don't have to hide what they're carrying. Virgo somehow represents that possibility. Not because you're expected to fix them, not because you're responsible for their healing, but because your connection showed them that love doesn't always ask people to become someone new. Sometimes it simply invites them to become more truthful. That realization feels incredibly important. The Hierophant enters the reading, and this is where everything begins to feel much more grounded. The fantasy is slowly giving way to intention. They're no longer daydreaming about temporary moments or wondering what could have been if circumstances were different. Their thoughts seem to stretch much further into the future. They've started imagining what stability might actually feel like, growing together instead of growing apart, building trust one conversation at a time, sharing ordinary mornings, supporting one another through seasons that aren't always easy. Those ideas carry much more weight than grand romantic gestures ever did. Yeah, I honestly feel they're redefining love altogether. For so long, they thought love was something you either won or lost, something that depended on timing or luck, something that disappeared the moment imperfections showed up. Virgo changed that belief without even trying, simply by being consistent, by remaining authentic, by showing compassion without asking for applause. Those qualities left a much deeper impression than they realized at the time. There's another feeling coming through that I don't want to ignore. This person seems to be releasing the habit of measuring themselves against everyone else. They spent so much energy wondering whether they were successful enough, attractive enough, accomplished enough, or interesting enough. Those comparisons created walls where intimacy could have existed. They're finally beginning to understand that real connection isn't built on perfection. It's built on presence, on honesty, on choosing one another even when life feels uncertain. Virgo, whether this person eventually speaks these thoughts aloud or continues processing them quietly for a little while longer, something within their heart seems to be growing steadier. Instead of running from the possibility of genuine love, they're slowly becoming curious about what it might feel like to stay, to listen, to trust, and to build something that isn't based on fear, but on sincerity. Three of Swords immediately changes the atmosphere again, but this time the pain feels much more honest. It doesn't feel like the kind of heartbreak people try to hide behind anger or blame. It feels quieter than that. Almost like someone finally stopped running long enough to hear the sound of their own regrets. Virgo, I keep feeling this person replaying one particular thought over and over. What if I had simply chosen differently? Not because they're trying to rewrite history, but because they're beginning to understand how many opportunities quietly slipped away while they were waiting for the perfect moment that never came. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons after the moment has already passed. They're recognizing conversations they avoided, phone calls they never made, feelings they convinced themselves could wait until tomorrow. Somehow tomorrow kept becoming another tomorrow, until one day they realized the distance between you had become much larger than they ever intended. Yeah, that's difficult for them to accept. There's another layer to this heartbreak that feels important. It isn't only about losing someone they cared about, it's realizing they may have walked away from the kind of future they secretly wanted all along. Three of Swords keeps pulling me toward images of ordinary dreams rather than dramatic ones. Sharing breakfast together, hearing about each other's day, planning little trips, decorating a home, growing older beside someone who actually understands the quiet parts of them. Those dreams seem much more real now than they ever did before. Two of Swords comes into the reading, and it almost feels like they're watching an older version of themselves from a distance. They remember how often they stood at emotional crossroads without making a choice. Every important decision seemed impossible because they were constantly listening to voices outside themselves. Family expectations, friends offering opinions, people telling them what love should look like, people reminding them to be careful, people encouraging them to protect themselves before protecting the relationship. Little by little, those voices became louder than their own heart. That's something they're finally beginning to notice. For so long, they believed they were making practical decisions. Looking back, they realized many of those choices were rooted in fear disguised as logic. Instead of asking themselves what felt genuine, they kept asking what would disappoint the fewest people. Unfortunately, the one person they ended up disappointing the most was themselves. The Fool reversed appears, and this card carries an energy that feels almost painfully reflective. I don't see someone laughing at the chances they missed anymore. I see someone standing in front of doors they once refused to open, wondering why they convinced themselves those doors were dangerous in the first place. Taking a chance on you required trust. Trust wasn't something they knew how to offer easily. It wasn't because you hadn't earned it. It was because they had spent years expecting every new beginning to eventually become another disappointment. Virgo, I honestly feel they've reached a point where excuses no longer comfort them. Blaming timing doesn't help. Blaming circumstances doesn't help. Even blaming other people doesn't bring peace anymore. They're slowly accepting that healing begins the moment they stop explaining away every decision that fear made on their behalf. Life itself seems to have become one of their greatest teachers recently. Unexpected changes, disappointments they never saw coming, situations that forced them out of familiar routines. Each experience seems to have quietly removed another layer of certainty they once depended on. Funny enough, those difficult moments also created space for self-awareness. Sometimes people only discover what's truly valuable after everything else they've been holding on to starts falling away. That's exactly how this energy feels. Two of Wands enters the reading, and for the first time in a while, I notice movement. Not rushed movement. Not impulsive decisions. Purposeful movement. They're no longer only looking backward, they're beginning to look toward the road ahead. The interesting thing is that they don't seem focused on finding another path. Their attention keeps drifting back toward the one they walked away from. They're imagining what it would actually take to return with honesty instead of uncertainty. What kind of conversation would need to happen? How much accountability would they have to accept? Would Virgo even be willing to listen? Those questions stay with them every day. Yeah, I think they're preparing much more carefully than anyone around them realizes. This doesn't feel like someone acting on temporary emotion. It feels like someone slowly reorganizing their priorities before making a meaningful decision. They understand that simply saying, "I'm sorry," may not be enough. Trust isn't rebuilt with beautiful words. It grows through consistency, through patience, through showing up differently than before. Virgo, one feeling continues standing out above everything else. They're no longer hoping life magically gives them another opportunity. They're beginning to understand that if another opportunity ever appears, they'll have to become someone capable of honoring it. That realization seems to be changing the direction of their entire journey, one quiet decision at a time. Judgment returns to the reading, but it feels very different this time. Earlier, it carried the feeling of awakening. Here, it feels more like a decision that has finally settled deep within someone's heart. There comes a moment when thinking is no longer enough. Reflecting is no longer enough. Regret eventually reaches a place where it quietly asks, "What are you going to do about it?" Virgo, I feel like this person has reached that place. They're beginning to understand that if they truly want another chance, they can't arrive carrying the same version of themselves that walked away before. Something has shifted inside them. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because they've grown tired of watching their own fears make every important decision. There's a quiet determination surrounding them that wasn't here before, almost like they've stopped arguing with what their heart has been trying to tell them. Ace of Wands appears, and I can almost feel fresh energy moving through this reading. This isn't the excitement of chasing something new. It feels much more intentional than that. It's the excitement that comes from finally believing a different future might actually be possible if they're willing to participate in creating it. For a long time, they hoped circumstances would somehow change on their own. Maybe time would fix everything. Maybe distance would erase the tension. Maybe another opportunity would simply appear without requiring courage. Those expectations seem to be fading. They're realizing that meaningful beginnings rarely happen without someone deciding to take the first honest step. Yeah, that first step feels incredibly important to them. I also sense conversations they've been rehearsing quietly inside their mind. Not dramatic speeches, not perfect explanations, just honest words they've never been brave enough to say. "I was afraid. I handled things poorly. I should have trusted you more. I should have trusted myself more." Simple sentences often carry the greatest weight because they're spoken without excuses. Temperance gently settles into the reading, and everything becomes calmer. They're no longer rushing toward an outcome. Instead, they're becoming more patient with the process of becoming the kind of partner they wish they had been from the beginning. That's a beautiful shift. They're learning that lasting relationships aren't built in one emotional conversation. They're built through consistency, through showing kindness on ordinary days, through listening when it's uncomfortable, through choosing honesty even when honesty feels vulnerable. Virgo, I almost feel this person slowing their entire life down. Instead of reacting, they're reflecting. Instead of defending themselves, they're learning to understand. Instead of trying to win every disagreement, they're wondering how two people might grow together instead. Three of Pentacles enters, and suddenly, I see someone thinking beyond emotions alone. They're thinking about building, creating, contributing. They don't simply want forgiveness. They want partnership. They're imagining what it would feel like to solve problems together instead of separately, to celebrate victories together, to support one another when life becomes unpredictable. For some of you, they may even be quietly imagining a shared home, a lasting commitment, or a future where the two of you create something meaningful side by side. Not because they're chasing an ideal fantasy anymore, because they've started appreciating ordinary happiness. Strength returns once again, and I love seeing it here. This card feels different than confidence. It feels like humility. They're beginning to understand that true strength isn't refusing to admit mistakes. It's standing in front of someone you care about and accepting responsibility without expecting immediate forgiveness. That may be one of the hardest things they've ever had to learn. I don't think they're looking for the perfect words anymore. They're looking for the courage to become someone whose actions speak louder than those words ever could. Every small decision they're making seems to move in that direction. Being more honest, being more present, taking responsibility instead of avoiding it, choosing openness instead of emotional distance. Those changes may appear small from the outside, yet they carry tremendous meaning because they're happening from within. Six of Cups closes this reading with an energy that feels incredibly warm. The memories are still there, but they no longer feel trapped inside regret alone. They've become reminders of what genuinely matters. This person isn't simply longing for the past. They're hoping to create new memories that are healthier than the old ones. They want moments built on trust instead of uncertainty, laughter instead of silence, presence instead of absence. Virgo, whether this journey unfolds quickly or unfolds one careful step at a time, I feel someone slowly becoming more aligned with the person they've always wanted to be. They're realizing that love isn't about proving they're perfect. It's about showing up consistently, accepting responsibility, and allowing another person to see them without the mask they once believed they needed. If another chapter is ever written between the two of you, it seems most likely to begin with a quieter heart, steadier hands, and someone who finally understands that real love is honored through everyday choices, one sincere step at a time.